What happens when the man you share your home with looks you in the eye and says, "You're not a wife, so you don't get a say in anything," and instead of fighting back, you quietly take him at his word? That's where Rachel Carter's story begins. At 32, Rachel was a successful marketing manager in Portland's tech scene. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, with a condo purchased in her own name, every lease, every bill, every contract tied solely to her. When Ethan, her boyfriend of 8 months, moved in, it was Rachel who held the foundation of their shared life. Yet somehow, inside her own home, she was treated as if she had no power, no voice. Ethan believed he was in control. He dismissed her opinions, brushed off her presence, and positioned himself as the decision-maker. But Rachel was not a woman who begged for validation. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. Instead, she turned his own words into her advantage. Because when you strip away someone's voice, you leave them free to act. And Rachel's silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before a shift so sharp it would rewrite not just her relationship, but the story of who she truly was. At a casual evening gathering inside Rachel's condo, the mood seemed light on the surface. Music played softly, glasses clinked, and Ethan held the attention of a small circle of friends. They were laughing, exchanging jokes, and speaking as if they were kings of the room. Rachel moved through her own space quietly, offering drinks, making sure everyone was comfortable. It was her home, after all, yet no one seemed to notice. And then Ethan delivered the words that would change the balance of everything. With a smirk, in front of his friends, he declared, "You're not my wife, Rachel. You don't get a vote." The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel in its carelessness. His friends chuckled as though Rachel were nothing more than a nagging tenant, a background character in the story of Ethan's life. The remark stung, not because Rachel believed it, but because of how easily it was accepted. Her own living room, her own carefully built life, had been reshaped in an instant into a stage where she was belittled. She smiled faintly, kept her composure, and said nothing. But within her silence, something shifted. Rachel was not a stranger to being underestimated. In her professional world, she had learned to navigate dismissive voices, to let people talk while she built strategies that outlasted their noise. But here in her home, Ethan's words revealed something deeper. A man who thrived on diminishing her, who needed to strip her of power to feel secure in his own. The irony was rich. Every bill in the condo, every document, every inch of stability belonged to Rachel. She had worked for years to afford the life she now lived. Ethan was simply a guest who had slipped into comfort without cost. And yet he stood there, mocking her in front of others, as though he were the one with authority. Rachel did not respond with rage or humiliation. She did not shout, did not protest, did not try to reclaim her dignity in that noisy room. Instead, she made a decision. If Ethan wanted to strip her of a voice, she would give him the silence he claimed to desire. If he believed she was nothing, then she would let him live with the weight of what it truly meant when someone became nothing in your life. Because sometimes the sharpest revenge is not delivered in words. Sometimes it begins in stillness, in quiet observation, and in the patience to wait until the right moment exposes the truth. And as Rachel cleared the glasses that night, invisible in her own home, she carried with her a calm resolve. Ethan thought he had won with his laughter, but Rachel knew the game had just begun. The morning after Ethan's careless declaration, Rachel carried herself as if nothing had changed, but inside, her resolve had crystallized. She greeted her elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson, while retrieving her mail. The old man, 70 years wise and endlessly curious, had watched Rachel grow into her independence. He noticed the faint tension in her expression and asked gently if she was all right. Rachel shared the story of the night before, the laughter, the words, the sting hidden behind her silence. Mr. Thompson leaned back, chuckled softly, and said with the clarity of someone who had seen too much life to sugarcoat it, "If he says you're not a wife, then you don't owe him husband privileges." Simple, sharp, and undeniable. His words lit a spark in Rachel. Suddenly, Ethan's arrogance was no longer a wound to carry but a challenge to answer. That afternoon, Rachel set her plan into motion. She began with his belongings, every sneaker, every gadget, every pile of laundry he had let spill across her home. Piece by piece, she packed them into sturdy cardboard boxes, each labeled with wicked humor: Gym Rat Starter Pack, Man-Child Essentials, Fragile Ego Handle with Care. What might have felt like drudgery became a strangely liberating act. By the end, the living room was lined with neatly stacked cartons, a monument to his temporary existence in her permanent world. Instead of discarding them, Rachel made arrangements with a local storage facility. She paid for 2 months in advance, ensuring Ethan's possessions would be safe, just not under her roof. The act was practical, but more importantly, symbolic. She was taking back her space, reclaiming her life inch by inch. Then came the transformation of her condo. Rachel bought cans of bright, warm paint and covered the muted walls with fresh light. The tired sofa Ethan loved to sprawl across was replaced with a sleek navy chaise, elegant and hers alone. She added bookshelves filled with novels and design journals, artwork that spoke to her soul, and finally, she set up a cozy corner for creative work, a place where her ideas could flourish without interruption. The most joyful step came when she brought home Luna, a long-haired gray cat with wide, curious eyes. The soft purrs and playful spirit of her new companion filled the home with life in a way Ethan's loud presence never had. Luna became more than a pet. She was a reminder that peace and companionship could come without compromise. And just to seal the shift, Rachel changed the Wi-Fi name to Not Your Castle with the password single and strong. Every time she connected her devices, the network name would flash as a private victory, a signal to herself that she was no longer tolerating someone else's claim to her kingdom. For Rachel, the changes were never just about furniture, paint, or passwords. They were about something deeper, reclaiming her voice, her sanctuary, her story. Reclaiming space isn't about walls and furniture, she thought. It's about rewriting who belongs there. When Ethan returned from his weekend trip, suitcase slung casually over his shoulder, he expected to step back into the apartment as though nothing had shifted. He slid his key into the lock with the same careless confidence he always carried, but this time the door refused him. The key turned, halted, and mocked his assumption of belonging. He tried again, harder, as if force alone could undo the truth waiting on the other side. The lock remained firm, unyielding, and his certainty cracked for the first time. Annoyance quickly became disbelief. He rang the doorbell, knocked with increasing impatience, then pulled out his phone to call Rachel. Each ring echoed into silence. No answer, no reprieve. He paced in front of the door, voice rising with each attempt. He was not used to being ignored, and the lack of response felt like an insult sharper than any word she had ever spoken. It was then that Mr. Thompson appeared, leaning on his cane with that mixture of mischief and wisdom etched into his weathered face. The old man paused, feigning surprise, his tone almost casual as he quipped, "Didn't you say you two weren't married? Well, looks like Rachel took you seriously." His words landed with a sting Ethan couldn't shake. Ethan scowled, muttering something defensive, but his eyes betrayed the unease growing within him. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, peering inside. The view struck him harder than any locked door could. The apartment he once treated like an extension of himself had transformed entirely. The pale walls were now bright and warm, the furniture rearranged with an elegance that excluded him, the air inside looking lighter, as though it belonged to someone freer. On the windowsill, a long-haired gray cat stretched lazily, gazing out with a serene detachment. Its mere presence said everything. This was no longer his home, and Rachel no longer his silent shadow. His phone buzzed in his hand. A new message. He opened it, expecting perhaps a plea for civility, an explanation, or even an invitation to talk. Instead, it was short, sharp, and decisive. "Your things are at the storage unit, code 6789. Good luck!" No apology, no bitterness, just clarity. A closing statement. The words burned. Anger flared instantly, spilling into his fingertips as he typed furiously, unleashing paragraph after paragraph of blame. He accused her of betrayal, of overreaction, of disrespect. He demanded explanations, tried to guilt her, tried to remind her of what he thought he had given. But his accusations only revealed his desperation, a scrambling attempt to regain the control he had assumed was permanent. Rachel read his long message in silence. For a brief second, she considered replying, but then she simply swiped her screen, pressed delete, and let the words dissolve into nothing. No anger, no need for rebuttal, just erasure. In her silence, she spoke louder than he ever could, because sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Ethan's frustration, once private, soon spilled into the digital world. He crafted a post for his social media feed, framing himself as the wounded party. In carefully chosen but emotionally charged words, he painted Rachel as cold, toxic, and ungrateful. He spoke of sacrifice, of misunderstandings, of a woman who supposedly turned on him without warning. His tone carried both self-pity and indignation, designed to summon sympathy from his circle of friends. With every sentence, he tried to reclaim the narrative, desperate to prove he was the one wronged. But the digital stage is fickle, and Rachel was not silent. A day later, she posted her own response, not with paragraphs of explanation, but with 2 simple photos, one of the apartment as it used to be, cluttered with Ethan's weights, sneakers, and careless mess, the other showing the refreshed space, brighter, cleaner, with Luna curled comfortably on the new navy sofa. Beneath the images, her caption was short yet cutting. "Respect the words you choose. He said I wasn't a wife, so I stopped playing one." The clarity of her words struck like a bell. Her post wasn't angry, nor was it defensive. It was truth distilled to its sharpest form, and it resonated. Comments began pouring in, not only from her close circle but from strangers who stumbled upon the post as it circulated. Women especially rallied to her side, sharing their own experiences of being dismissed, belittled, or taken for granted. They called her brave, they called her strong, and some even thanked her for saying what they never could. Meanwhile, Ethan's post began to wither under the weight of silence. The validation he craved did not come. Friends who once laughed at his jokes or cheered him on in his workouts gave no reaction. A few even reached out privately, not to console him, but to quietly applaud Rachel. Their absence on his feed became louder than words. He noticed the disparity. While her post gained traction, his lingered untouched, like a spotlight on his isolation. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't bask in the attention. She read the supportive messages, smiled at a few, but she knew public opinion wasn't the prize. The real victory had already happened. The lock on the door, the new life inside her home, the quiet companionship of Luna at her side. Still, the outpouring reminded her of something important. She wasn't alone. Her private decision to reclaim her dignity had become a shared story, one that echoed in the lives of countless others. As she closed her phone and turned back to her evening, she reflected on it with clarity. Public opinion doesn't heal wounds, nor does it erase betrayal. But sometimes it validates what your heart already knows, that you were right to walk away, and stronger for having done so. A month later, the apartment no longer carried traces of Ethan. What once felt like shared space had become Rachel's sanctuary. The walls seemed brighter, the air lighter, as if even the atmosphere had shifted to match her sense of freedom. Every evening, Luna would curl up beside her, a silent reminder that companionship could be steady, gentle, and free from the weight of constant belittlement. Their quiet routines, morning coffee by the window, evenings with a book on the couch, became anchors of peace that Rachel hadn't realized she'd been craving for so long. Ethan, meanwhile, had retreated to his parents' home. His attempts to salvage his pride with online bravado faded quickly, leaving him with the uncomfortable reality of empty space and dwindling sympathy. His anger lingered, but for Rachel, he no longer occupied space in her mind. She didn't check his updates, didn't read the scattered messages he occasionally tried to send. For her, that chapter was closed. In this new season of her life, Rachel found clarity in lessons that were both simple and profound. The first was respect for herself above all else. She realized that waiting for someone else to validate her worth was a losing game. If someone chose to undermine her, to treat her as less, the most powerful response was not to argue or beg, but to walk away with her dignity intact. The second lesson was about words. Ethan's careless declaration that she wasn't his wife and therefore had no say had cut deep in the moment. But instead of dwelling on the pain, Rachel chose to let those words define her next move. If he said she wasn't a wife, then she stopped living like one. His words carried weight, but so did her actions. And her actions spoke louder than any argument could. The third lesson was about boundaries. Rachel had always believed that love meant compromise, but she now understood that compromise without limits becomes self-erasure. Setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. It was a form of self-respect, a way to protect her peace and her identity. By closing the door, by changing the locks, she wasn't punishing Ethan, she was protecting herself. And in doing so, she reclaimed not just her space, but her sense of self. As Rachel settled deeper into her new life, she recognized that the story wasn't really about Ethan at all. It was about her, the woman who chose to listen to her own worth rather than to the dismissive words of someone who couldn't see it. She had turned humiliation into liberation and silence into strength. And so the question lingered, not just for Rachel, but for anyone who had ever felt diminished in their own home. Have you ever been treated like you didn't matter in your own space? What would you do to reclaim it,